I never thought a few barrels of rainwater would spark a war. It all started on a crisp April afternoon when I found the letter. The envelope was thick, expensive, and official-looking, with the Pinecrest Gardens HOA logo embossed in gold at the top. My stomach twisted as I unfolded it, scanning the neatly typed words. Dear Mr. Mitchell, this notice serves as a formal warning regarding unauthorized structures on your property. Your failure to comply within 7 days will result in a $100 daily fine. I stopped reading. My eyes flicked to my 3 blue rainwater barrels, sitting neatly behind my wooden fence, where they had been for over 2 years without a single complaint. Those barrels weren't just plastic containers. They were the lifeblood of my garden. My garden wasn't some casual hobby. It was a carefully curated ecosystem filled with rare heirloom plants, some so unique they didn't exist anywhere else. My grandmother's golden heirloom tomatoes, fiery ghost peppers, and a delicate Japanese cucumber variety I'd spent years perfecting. And now, the HOA want to take it all away over some bogus rule? I stormed across the street to my neighbor Tom's house. Before I could even knock, he opened the door, waving an identical letter in the air. Let me guess, he said. Judith's at it again. Judith Winters. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. She had been HOA president for only 6 months, but in that time, she had turned our neighborhood into a dictatorship. I'm sick of this, I muttered, gripping the paper. They've never had a problem with my rain barrels before. Tom sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Rumor is, Judith's brother-in-law just started a landscaping business. They're targeting homeowners who grow their own plants, trying to force us to pay for their approved services. A slow, burning rage settled in my chest. They weren't just coming for my water. They were coming for my home, my livelihood, my freedom. And I wasn't about to let them win. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I pored over every HOA bylaw, city ordinance, and legal document I could find. The city code explicitly allowed rainwater collection, but HOA rules? Those were murkier, filled with loopholes and contradictions. At dawn, I called a number on the letter. Pinecrest Gardens HOA. This is Marcus speaking. Marcus Jenkins, the HOA compliance officer and Judith's right-hand man. This is James Mitchell. I said, I received a notice about my rain barrels, but according to city code, they're perfectly legal. There was a pause, too long, too calculated. Then the smooth, detached response. The board has determined your water collection system violates Section 8.3 of the covenant regarding unsightly structures. They're not unsightly. They're behind my fence. Another pause. Then Marcus sighed, as if I was a child who just wouldn't listen. Perhaps Pinecrest Gardens isn't the right neighborhood for your alternative lifestyle choices, Mr. Mitchell. Alternative lifestyle choices. He said it like I was some kind of radical extremist for watering my plants. I clenched my jaw. I'd like to appeal this decision. You're welcome to address the board at next month's meeting, Marcus said smoothly. Until then, the removal deadline stands. I hung up, my hand shaking. They wanted me gone, and I had 7 days to fight back. That evening, as I stood in my garden, watering what might be my plant's final days, my elderly neighbor Elaine waved me over. Be careful, James, she whispered, glancing around as if someone might be listening. I frowned. What do you mean? Her voice dropped lower. Last year, the Garcias installed solar panels. Judith didn't like it. They fought back. 2 weeks later, their roof mysteriously failed inspection. They had to remove them. My stomach twisted. That can't be legal. Elaine shook her head. The law doesn't matter when the people in charge make their own rules. A breeze rustled the leaves, but Elaine wasn't finished. You ever hear about Raymond? I shook my head. He lived on Sycamore Lane. Had a koi pond, beautiful thing. HOA tried to find him over it. He refused. 2 days later, all his fish were dead. I stiffened. Couldn't prove anything, of course, she murmured. But we all knew. Just watch your garden. I barely slept that night. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. A motion alert from my new security camera. I bolted upright and clicked the notification. The grainy night vision footage showed a shadowy figure slipping along my fence. Then I watched, horrified, as the person poured something into my water tanks. I threw on my shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and ran outside. But they were gone, and in the darkness, my garden felt different, like something was dying. By morning, I had 3 sealed water samples and a sinking feeling in my gut. I drove straight to a friend's lab at the community college. "Give me a few hours," she promised. I paced my garden, looking for any signs of damage. The leaves were still green, the plants still standing. Maybe I'd stopped in time. At noon, my phone rang. James, my friend, said, "Where did you get this water?" My heart pounded. "Why?" Her voice was grave. "1 sample is normal. The second has traces of copper sulfate. The third, James, it's filled with industrial herbicide, glyphosate, at lethal levels." I staggered back. "If your plants drink this, they'll be dead in days. And if this gets into the groundwater..." I didn't let her finish. I sprinted to my garden and ripped out every irrigation tube connected to the third tank. My hands shook as water splashed over my boots. Had I been fast enough? I didn't know. But the real question was, who had done this? And how the hell was I going to prove it? That night, Tom and I huddled over my laptop, reviewing the security footage frame by frame. At 2:17 a.m., a man in a dark jacket with an HOA logo on the back slipped into my yard. "Marcus." "Holy hell," Tom whispered. "We have him. That's Marcus Jenkins. We're taking this to the police." I stormed into the station the next morning, security footage and water test results in hand. Officer Lopez reviewed the evidence with a blank expression. "So you're saying the HOA compliance officer poisoned your water tanks?" "I'm not saying it. I'm showing you." Lopez sighed. "Look, James, the video's inconclusive. Maybe Marcus was treating standing water for mosquitoes." I nearly laughed. "Have you already talked to Judith?" His flinch told me everything I needed to know. The system was rigged. The HOA owned this town. And if I wanted justice, I was going to have to take it myself. No more playing nice. They wanted a war. They'd just gotten one. The HOA thought I was alone. They were wrong. The night after the police brushed me off, I sat at my kitchen table, replaying the footage of Marcus poisoning my water tanks. My fists clenched every time I saw his smug face in the grainy footage. They got away with it, and they knew it. A sharp knock on my back door made me jolt. I grabbed a kitchen knife. Paranoia was starting to set in before cautiously peering outside. Tom stood there, glancing over his shoulder like he'd been followed. Behind him, 5 other neighbors shuffled inside, faces tight with anger. "Close the blinds," Maria Garcia whispered. I didn't argue. "What's going on?" I asked, heart still racing. Tom dropped a thick folder onto my kitchen table. "We're not the only ones," he said. Inside were pages of documented HOA abuses. The Rodriguez twins' pool permit, delayed for months, while Judith's friend got approval overnight. The Patel family's garden, mysteriously damaged by an accidental chemical spray. The Reynolds family's wheelchair ramp, rejected twice over aesthetic concerns. It was a pattern, a clear, methodical campaign to force certain people out. Maria leaned forward. "They've been doing this for years. But your case, James, this is the boldest move yet. Poisoning your water? That's criminal." The room was quiet. Then Tom broke the silence. "We need to fight back." I met his eyes. "How?" Maria smiled grimly. "We start by making sure they don't win." The next morning, I stepped outside and froze. A landscaping truck sat in my driveway. Workers in HOA-branded uniforms were loading my water tanks onto the truck. "Hey, stop." I ran toward them, rage bubbling over. A familiar, smug voice cut through the air. "Mr. Mitchell." Judith Winter stepped out from behind the truck. Arms crossed, a sickly sweet smile stretched across her face. She was enjoying this. These tanks have been classified as an environmental hazard. As per HOA emergency protocols, we're removing them. I clenched my fists. "You poisoned them." Her expression didn't flicker. That's a serious accusation, James. I took a step forward. I have video proof. Judith sighed dramatically. You mean that grainy footage? Easily misinterpreted. But if you want to file a lawsuit, be my guest. Just know, lawsuits take time. And money. Her smile widened. Speaking of money, check your mailbox. My stomach sank. I sprinted to my mailbox and ripped open the newest HOA notice. Special assessment, $223,000. The charge? Environmental cleanup and legal fees related to hazardous waste removal. My vision went red. Judith's voice was like nails on a chalkboard. You can pay the fine, or we start foreclosure proceedings in 30 days. I turned, ready to fight, but my neighbors were watching. I saw them peeking from behind curtains, standing on porches, afraid. That's when I realized Judith wasn't just coming for me. She was sending a message to everyone else. Step out of line, and this is what happens. Not on my watch. That night, I sat in my darkened kitchen, staring at my laptop. I had proof. I had witnesses. But fighting Judith in court would take months, maybe years. I needed something louder. Then a text buzzed through my phone. Tom, meet me at the community garden. Now, I slipped out the back door and found Tom waiting behind the maintenance shed. And that's when I saw it. A massive delivery of fresh manure. Hundreds of pounds of it. It was meant for community flower beds. But what if it had a better purpose? Tom's eyes twinkled. You thinking what I'm thinking? I swallowed. This was insane. But then I thought about my dying garden. My stolen water tanks. The $223,000 fine. I thought about Judith, smirking in my driveway. I turned to Tom. Let's do it. We had a plan. We had the timing down. But then, fate handed me something better. As we were finalizing details, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Meet me at the corner. Come alone. I hesitated. It could be a trap. But something in my gut told me to go. At the corner, a teenage girl stood under a flickering streetlight. I recognized her instantly. Sophia Jenkins, Marcus's daughter. She looked scared. Hands shaking, she thrust a USB drive into my hand. My dad doesn't know I have this, she whispered. It's his dash cam footage. It recorded everything. I stared at the tiny device in my palm. What do you mean, everything? Her voice cracked. The night they poisoned your water, Judith was in the car with him, telling him exactly what to do. My blood ran cold. You have proof? I asked. Sophia nodded. They think they're untouchable. Make sure they aren't. And just like that, I had the smoking gun. Judith had planned a surprise HOA meeting at 3 p.m. the next day. She thought it was to finalize my removal. She had no idea it was about to be her downfall. By 2:50 p.m., 63 homeowners, more than I had ever seen together, stood with me outside the community center. Tom, Maria, the Rodriguez twins, Elaine, all of them. When we walked inside, Judith's face paled. Marcus, seated beside her, suddenly found his paperwork very interesting. What is the meaning of this? Judith snapped, banging her gavel. This is a closed session. Dylan, my lawyer, stepped forward. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner may attend with 24-hour notice. The HOA secretary counted the crowd, her face tightening. We had the numbers. I stepped forward. My name is James Mitchell. Yesterday, I delivered 470 pounds of manure to this office. A murmur rippled through the room. I continued. Today, I bring something else. I nodded to Tom, who plugged the USB drive into projector. Judith barely had time to react before her own voice filled the room. Just enough to kill everything without being obvious, she said on screen. Once his garden dies, he'll have no reason to fight the removal. Then the landscaping contract goes to your brother-in-law as agreed. The room exploded. Shouting, yelling, accusations flying. Judith lunged to a projector, but Tom had anticipated that. The footage was playing from a battery-powered backup. Sophia stood up. It's real. My dad's dash cam records automatically. Marcus slumped in his chair. Judith's mouth opened, closed, open again, but no words came out, because for the first time in years, she had lost, and Pinecrest Gardens was finally taking back what was ours. For the first time since Judith Winters seized control of Pinecrest Gardens, she was speechless. The room buzzed with stunned whispers. Neighbors who had once cowered under her rule were now staring at her in disgust. Some had their phones out, recording the entire meeting as the damning footage looped behind her. Marcus finally spoke. "She's right," he muttered, shoulders slumped. "Judith ordered it. I did it." The confession hit the room like a bomb. "You poisoned my water," I said coldly. "You nearly killed my garden, maybe even contaminated our groundwater." Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'll pay for the damage," he said weakly. Judith's face twisted in rage. "Marcus, shut up," she shrieked. But it was too late. Dylan, my lawyer, cleared his throat. "Given that we now have a confession on record, along with clear evidence of financial fraud, environmental violations, and intimidation, I move that we immediately vote for the removal of the entire HOA board." Judith slammed her gavel down. "This meeting isn't authorized." Maria stood up, holding the original HOA bylaws high in the air. "Actually, Judith, when 2/3 of homeowners are present, they can call for an emergency vote." I looked around the packed room. We had over 70% of the neighborhood here. Maria smirked. "And I think it's time we decide who's really in charge." All in favor of removing Judith Winters and the current board. I called out. One by one, hands shot into the air. Judith's smirk faltered. Then it disappeared completely as every single hand in the room went up. She had lost. For the first time, Pinecrest Gardens was free. Judith stormed out of the community center, her face red with fury. But Marcus didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the table. Officer Lopez, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Jenkins, I need both of you to come with me for questioning." Judith whirled around. "What?" "This is harassment. You can't." Lopez held up a printed copy of the leaked contract between her brother-in-law's landscaping company and the HOA. "It's funny," he said, "because receiving financial kickbacks for selective enforcement, that's fraud." Judith's mouth snapped shut. Lopez turned to Marcus. "And you just confessed to poisoning a water supply, which violates environmental laws." The color drained from Marcus's face. "I didn't think." Lopez sighed. "Yeah, that's the problem." As Lopez escorted them out, the room erupted into cheers. Judith Winters was gone, but the real work was just beginning. By the next morning, our new interim HOA board was already making changes. The $223,000 fine against me? Gone. The selectively enforced rules? Scrapped. Judith's brother-in-law's landscaping contract? Terminated. For the first time in years, Pinecrest Gardens was being run by the people who actually lived there. And I had my garden back. 3 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the botanical garden." I hesitated. Then another message came through. "It's Marcus. I just want to talk." I almost deleted it. But curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, Marcus was in work clothes, covered in dirt. He was kneeling in a flower bed, carefully tending to a patch of young plants. He saw me and wiped his hands on his jeans. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. I crossed my arms. "I almost didn't." He nodded. "I deserve that." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Marcus motioned toward the plants. "These are from your garden.